Thanasi, I think it's time for us to make our AEW Worlds End predictions.
Let's do it.
So, to start off, we're going to go with the outcome for the Continental Classic Tournament final, and that is Eddie Kingston versus John Moxley. And this is obviously for the Triple Crown Championship, which is the ROH World Championship, the New Japan Strong Openweight Championship, and the inaugural AEW Continental Championship. And I say this has championships galore in its title, in its name. What is going on? Who is going to win?
Look, I think for my side, because this is the redemption of the everyman, it is Eddie Kingston coming back from two losses early on in the tournament, that he is well and truly going to be winning here. Partly, there's the counterfactual that I'm thinking about, and I just don't see Mox becoming ROH world champion. I just don't see them putting that strap on him. And because that is the ultimate result from that would be the ultimate result of a Mox victory, I am going with Eddie Kingston.
I'm going with Eddie Kingston too, purely because of that last point you make, which is I just don't see Moxley gunning for these titles right now. Whereas with Eddie, I do see him being able to contribute in all of those aspects and be able to defend. And the other thing that I find interesting is they announced a couple of weeks prior, I believe, that whoever wins the Continental Classic would defend it in the next year's edition. And I just think that rather than restricting John Moxley to Continental Classic status again next year, give yourself time and see if you want him there or if he's going to want to be doing something else at that time. Whereas with Eddie Kingston, you just feel like in a year's time, he probably will still be in this sort of position. So it makes sense. And you might as well give him an accolade because God knows he's earned it.
Oh yeah.
Next up, we have Julia Hart versus Abaddon for the AEW TBS Championship. And I think this one really is a simple prediction. I think it has to be champion retains here with Julia Hart. Do you agree, Thanasi?
I frankly agree with you. I think Abaddon was an easy transitional number one contender, is how I refer to them. Even though she's had a fantastic win-loss record this year, don't get me wrong, I just don't see her being the one to unseat Julia Hart. So that's why I'm going with the champ.
Let's see if we agree on the third match, which is going to be Timeless Tony Storm versus Riho for the AEW Women's World Championship. Thanasi, who have you got for this one?
Well, once again, I'm going with the champion retains. I think that the real money from this storyline is not about Tony Storm versus Riho. I think it's in the ultimate end game, which is Tony Storm versus Mariah May, kind of like an admiree breakup angle, so to speak, like a Mickey James or Trish Stratus vibe. I think that's our ultimate end game. Maybe with Mariah May winning the championship later on down the line, perhaps if it's a lengthy reign and she really builds up. But I think that that is where we're heading here. And I don't see Riho being champion being conducive to that particular storyline.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And I think it's the other issue I have with the AEW Women's World Championship is it has felt like a bit of a hot potato championship this year. So I would like to see Tony Storm at least hold on to it for a bit longer and sort of bring a bit of prestige back to it
Yeah.
before she does drop it again. Next up, we've got what has been essentially a makeshift match because of Kenny Omega's untimely illness. And that is Ricky Starks, Big Bill, and the Don Callis family members Kyle Fletcher and Powerhouse Hobbs versus Chris Jericho, Sammy Guevara, Sting, and Darby Allin. So it's going to be an 8-man tag team match. Sammy Guevara tagging again with Chris Jericho. They're once again aligned. He's a bit of a hot potato heel face at the current time. How do you see this playing out?
Well, I think this is one where we're going to disagree because this one's a little bit more volatile. Look, I'm going to go with the heels on this one, mostly because Ricky Starks and Big Bill wear championship gold, and I don't think it would be a good look for their side to be on the losing end. And that being said, because Sting and Darby Allin did have a nice big victory, a feel-good victory in California at the last big pay-per-view, that maybe they're going to be putting heels over on this one. So a bit weaker logic and a little bit based on 50-50 booking. But that's the prediction that I'm going with.
See, that's interesting because for this one, I am also sort of considering those factors. But for me, one thing that outweighs the champions' advantage, or at least the idea of protecting the champions, is for me protecting Sting. And what I mean by that is I don't think Sting has lost a match in AEW. And quite frankly, I think they should preserve that. I may be wrong there, but I'm just presuming that he hasn't lost a match from what I can remember. And if true, I would want them to save that one loss in his final match at AEW Revolution. So for that reason, I'm going with the faces. Moving on, we've got a grudge match, and that is Swerve Strickland versus Keith Lee. And I say this has been a match sort of months in the making, really, without any build towards it, but it's always been there festering underneath the surface, bubbling under the surface. This should be an interesting spectacle, but who does ultimately win the feud?
Look, I think you're right about that point that it has been there in the background constantly, always been teased regularly, just poking the bear, so to speak. And I think based on the momentum that he's got now, you can't look past Swerve Strickland. You just can't. But I'm hoping that this is not kind of a midpoint in their feud. I'm hoping this well and truly is the end for Swerve to say, I'm pushing back 2023. It's been my year of growth. This has been the last person or the last wrestler who's a thorn in my side. Next year we're gunning for the main event seat. And that's how I want this to go.
Yeah, I completely agree. This has been such a great year for Swerve in terms of really endearing himself to the AEW audience and really getting them behind him as a wrestler. With Keith Lee, it does feel a bit stagnant right now. That not all of that is his fault, but it is just how circumstances have gone. And for that reason, you got to go with the person who's got the momentum, keep them strong so that they keep pushing forward. And like you said, make sure that 2024 is the year of Swerve. So for me, you've got to back him as well here. We've got another sort of mid-card grudge match of some sort. They've been building up to it in recent weeks, and that is Miro versus Andrade El Idolo, who is with CJ as his manager, who has CJ as his manager. So that's adding an extra bit of spice for this bout. But Fancy, how does this one fare for you?
This one's another interesting one because it's also been unclear what the direction is between Miro and his wife. It's kind of like bickering, but to what end? And it's making me curious. I think potentially we have an opportunity to have an explanation here of what CJ's stance is regarding Miro. But just for fun, I think that Andrade is going to get the victory here. I think there's more to come out of a CJ's client being victorious against Miro than vice versa. So I'm going with the luchador.
I don't really have any specific reasoning behind this, but my gut feeling is that Miro will win this. I think look, there's no denying he's a very strong man. He's got some beef to him, shall we say? So
Meat.
yes, I just think that he will be able to overpower Andrade in the end. I think they will have a great match, but in the end, it will be Miro that comes out on top. I am curious to see the sort of interaction he has with CJ after winning as well. Like, does he eye
Mm.
her down? Is there like a moment of silence there? Does she actually go back and do they reunite? Do the lovers finally come back together, or what the deal's going to be? So in a weird way, I am very curious to see what happens with this particular match. Perhaps more so than some of the other matches that even have titles behind them, because there's just that extra bit of intrigue there. All right, next we've got was probably the second most anticipated match and potentially the most anticipated match for some, and that is Christian Cage versus Adam Copeland in a no disqualification match for the AEW TNT Championship. This one has felt like properly decades in the making, for being honest, to have what feels like a very high-end championship match between the two. And I say this could go down so many different paths, but which is the one that you think it will go down?
Well, see, here's my thing. I don't think that we are at the end of the Christian, the patriarch angle. But I also don't think that he needs the strap necessarily for this angle to be legitimate, for it to be strong. I do think though that it strengthens it to the extent possible. But given that he's already defeated Adam Copeland, I'm struggling to figure out what else they can do here. Like, is it going to be another DQ finish, some kind of a dirty finish? They've already removed disqualifications from the equation. So I'm kind of trying to figure out how else they can go about it. And because I can't think of anything else, my conclusion, based off of um, based off of Sherlock Holmes, remove all of the impossible. I'm removing all of the improbable, which is not the right way to go, but nevertheless, by removing all of the improbable, what's left must be the truth. And it strikes me as Adam Copeland coming out victorious must be the solution. So I'm going with Adam Copeland.
I'm backing my boy Christian Cage, the father of wrestling, the patriarch of AEW. But I will have to admit that in making this prediction, I'm also reflecting, and I have a sneaky suspicion that this might be a repeat of Revolution 2022. And what I mean by that is in the match between MJF and CM Punk to ultimately end their rivalry at the time, MJF was betrayed right at the end by Wardlow, his right-hand man, who gave the ring to CM Punk to win the match. And I think in this vein that Killswitch is going to come out supposedly or seemingly to the aid of Christian Cage, and then he's actually going to betray him and finally turn against the Patriarch. Because right now it seems like that faction, in that faction, Killswitch is the odd man out, the odd person out. So that's something that I think could happen, and it's part of this idea of like the match is just this feud is just ongoing drama that involves all these extra members and not just the two brothers in the ring. But I still think that's just something that I suspect might happen. My gut feel still Christian Cage is going to win because I'd rather him drop it to someone that needs that win.
Mm.
And finally, we have MJF versus Samoa Joe for the AEW World Championship. And I say this is a match that even beyond the story they are telling in the ring has intrigue outside of it because of the supposed contract expiry of MJF. That's thrown a lot of spanner in the works for people in thinking what exactly can happen in this match. We've now got the devil situation. Samoa Joe has openly aligned himself with said devil. Does this mean Samoa Joe can dethrone the AEW World Champion?
I'm going to give you twofold logic, and each branch of my logic leads to the same conclusion. On the first point, Samoa Joe touched the gold on the go home episode, and as a rule, you touch the gold means you don't win the gold. So MJF wins by default. However, I had posed this hypothetical to you on a previous episode of the podcast, which our listeners can hear on the channel. However, what I predicted was, what if MJF gets through a hellacious match against Samoa Joe, comes out on top, big babyface moment, and then the lights go out. We hear some kind of audio that indicates Tony Khan is bringing back a superstar who had predicted earlier this year, in the middle of this year, that they would win championship gold, but has not yet fulfilled that prophecy because of suspension, partly. And that man is returned to AEW with an immediate title shot for the world title. Jack Perry returns from suspension, gets the victory. This is notably, he's defeating MJF, who has retained against Samoa Joe. So this is still consistent with my prediction. And that leaves everything up in the air for, will MJF re-sign for 2024, or will he be heading off to apparently greener pastures like his contemporaries CM Punk and Cody Rhodes? So that's where I'm going with this one.
Well, Fantasy, I can tell you right now, I'm willing to put it on the line. If that exact situation happens, I'm giving you like automatic victory in these predictions. Mine is far more simplistic. MJF wins, the devil is revealed. I don't know who it could be, but I don't think it will be a title match that night. But if it goes down exactly as you said it happened, I'm willing to concede because my God, that is a hell of a prediction.
I'm holding you to it. This is going on social media.
Okay, well, all right. Well, we'll see exactly what happens at AEW Worlds End.